Welcome to Season 2, Episode 12 of the Amplified Marriage Podcast. Are you on autopilot? Today we talk about what it looks like to coast in your relationship.
Welcome to another episode of Amplified Marriage. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Brian.
You've heard us say this every single podcast. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, grab a seat, cozy up with a blanket, make sure you have your tea and coffee. We are so excited to have a chat with you today.
In case you missed our last week's, or 2 weeks ago, episode, we actually met with Ben and Jen, and we had them on the podcast, and they talked about how having a bit of a challenging past and broken relationships and history of addiction, and how you can go from having that kind of past all the way up to being a healthy marriage and having a healthy marriage.
That's right. One of the things I love about having guests is that you just scratch the surface.
Just a little bit.
Right? And so we're going to be having them back for...
Absolutely. And just get a little bit more into the nitty gritty.
That's right. It was so good to have them.
So Ben said right at the beginning of last week's podcast, he's a pilot, and he was talking about some of the training that he's been doing these last few weeks. And it was interesting what he was talking about, having to plot courses and doing things like this. And we talked even off the podcast just about autopilot and things like that. And he said, part of the training is as they're doing it, there's a lot of things, a lot of variables that has to get thrown at him while he's doing the training.
Right.
So while he's doing this, he has to plot courses. You have to check wind and distance.
Adjust on the fly.
He has to adjust on the fly. And we talked a little bit about autopilot. And the topic that we want to get into today is actually the title we have is your marriage, or are you on autopilot? And the thing about autopilot or coasting in your relationship is that autopilot, you don't have to sit there and focus on what you're doing. You don't have to focus on the wind. You don't have to focus on the up and down. You don't have to focus on anything. And so if we take that autopilot, if you're just sitting on autopilot, there's no work being put into it.
No.
It's just you hit a button and all of a sudden you're just going.
Right.
And if you're not careful, you can fly that plane into the side of a mountain because you just let the plane do the work, and it's not going to correct for you. It's not going to make any adjustments.
Yes.
It's just going to go in the direction that you put it. Now, comparing that to a marriage or a relationship, if you do not put any effort into your relationship, if you don't put any time, any communication, any of those things, you can run your relationship into the side of a mountain.
That's right.
And if you're not careful, that side of the mountain could be an affair. It could be pornography. Yeah. It could be an addiction. It could just be, your kids leave home and then you look at your partner and you're like, who are you? Right?
I mean, it doesn't have to be something like a major event that kind of is that signifier that you're coasting.
Right. But oftentimes, even in our experience of coaching with couples, those couples that don't really want to put any effort into it, there ends up being a damage that comes to their relationship. Sometimes you can repair these things. Coasting doesn't necessarily have to mean destruction.
Right.
But what happens is you're not focused on the relationship. You become on autopilot, so you're not seeing what's happening left or right or up or down or what's coming in to maybe cause a problem or anything like that. And so instead of dealing with situations or parenting problems or things that may be happening at work, you're actually just letting them fester.
Right. Actually, this just came to me. When you're driving down the highway and you're so focused, most vehicles nowadays have cruise control. And you're driving down, you're like a straight stretch, and you're so almost so focused that your sense of perception and peripheral vision kind of goes out the window because you're just kind of staring blankly.
Yeah.
It's happened to me when I'm driving.
Yeah.
And then if something jumps out, your reflexes are that much slower because you're not hyper aware of your surroundings, right?
For sure.
When we talk about coasting in marriage, and we hope that this just sparks a conversation. And the topics that we talk about, we've lived through.
Yeah.
And some of these were like, hey, this is a really great reminder for us to be aware as we get into some of the telltale signs, I guess you could say,
Right.
of whether or not you're coasting, of like, we've been here, I think,
Mhm.
more often than not, and really making sure that even though we've been married for 20 years, how easy it would be just to fall into that autopilot mode, because, things have been really kind of going well the last several years. And so you kind of let your guard down, and not to scare anybody, but we want to make sure that we're bringing awareness to some of these problematic areas. And this one in particular, I feel like is not so obvious.
And the thing is that when we talk about autopilot or coasting in your relationship, it's generally because you feel really, really comfortable with the other person,
Yes.
right? Like so much so that all of your bad habits and all of the weird things that you do and your idiosyncrasies, you're not trying to cover them up and you're not trying to hide them, or you're just being who you are when you've been in the relationship for as long as we have. There's really nothing that I'm embarrassed about anymore.
No.
Except for maybe when my hair is a little sideways and you didn't tell me, and we're at a superstore and someone looks at me strangely.
Right, but I'm talking like if you're talking about character things, I don't think there's anything
that I'm hiding anymore.
No.
Like, it's been 20 years. You've seen the worst of me, the best of me.
Yeah.
And so that's the stage that you can get in, and you can just coast.
Right.
And you almost stop putting effort into dating. You stop putting effort into appearance. You stop putting effort into all these little things that really amount to little things that make the relationship move forward.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there's something to be said about, like we've said this before, where like love covers a multitude of sins. And so if I'm basing that on our relationship of like, okay, you already know this about me, so I really I can just be okay
Right.
to be in this state because you already know this about me, but there's not an active, hey, you've brought this to my attention.
Right.
I'm aware of it now. And so now I'm making active steps to make sure that that I'm rectifying this
Right.
particular behavior, whatever it might be, instead of just kind of sitting back and being like, I am who I am.
Yeah.
And this is it. And so we don't try anymore. And I think back to our earlier years of this mentality of like, why bother?
Yeah. He's never going to change.
Right. And so we were coasting along, and it was not a healthy, sometimes you can get like things are going really well and you're like, you feel like you're connecting and you're coasting along and don't be fooled that can be equally as problematic as, where we were in a more not volatile, maybe you would consider it volatile, but just a more distressing situation. It was more obvious. Hey, these are the behaviors, and we're just going to keep moving forward because there's not like anything's going to change. And so we just accept it for what it is.
And even in some of the study that we were getting into as we were preparing, and some of the things that we've learned over the last few years, is there's kind of three things. There's connecting, there's coasting, and crisis.
Right.
And everyone assumes a crisis is the worst. Crisis really isn't the worst, because you're actually, when you're in crisis, it means, in our mind anyway,
you're disagreeing.
You're disagreeing. Your relationship is in crisis, but at that point, you're still fighting for it. You're still fighting for the relationship. You care enough still that you want the relationship to work. And so with connecting, obviously that makes sense. You're connecting with each other. You're working on the marriage. You're growing forward. You're moving forward. But then there's that space in the middle where coasting really can be the most dangerous thing. And that's how emotional affairs start. That's how affairs start. Because you're not working on anything together. And so I'm not sparked with you, but I did find this fulfillment over with this other person.
That's
because they triggered that laughter in me, or that whatever that may be, or they got that conversation. So
when this whole thing of like, that could never happen.
That
like how many times have we said
goodness,
that of like, oh, hearing about other people's either disastrous marriage stories or like really sad situations, and you're like, oh geez, like that could never happen because we're doing this and that and the other. And I feel like that mindset is the beginning of one that like where your guard is down.
You're setting yourself up for something to happen,
right?
Instead of just guarding and setting up precautions and like things that there has to be a multitude of things that in my life that would have to go wrong that I've set in place for that kind of thing to happen.
Right. And there's a scripture in Galatians that says, take heed lest you fall.
Yeah.
And that one's always in the back of my mind whenever I hear other people's stories or other people's testimonies of what they've walked through, of like,
For sure.
never be so secure in my own abilities that I think that I'm exempt from ever having anything happen. And the whole purpose of relationships is so that they evolve and they grow.
Yeah.
And that they still, you know, I strengthen you and you strengthen me, and that we come to this place of feeling alive. I guess the
With
relationship's alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And autopilot, I think, really throws that wrench in the wheel.
Yeah. So there's a few things that we want to just like, that are like a check that you can look at in your own relationship, that may indicate that you're in a position of coasting,
Right.
or you've put your relationship on autopilot. And this is meant, again, to spark conversation. We want you to be able to look at your spouse and be like, hey man, I really feel like some of these things are us right now. And then the only way you can get out is if you identify it, you agree with it, and you move forward.
Right. And I think sometimes, because, you know, to have a, what's the word? A marriage that's moving forward, it requires work.
Right.
And there are times where it's exhausting, the amount of work, and it feels like you're taking, you know, 100 steps back and 1 step forward, you know? But I want to encourage you, like, this whole feeling of just being emotionally tired. It's a real thing.
It's a real thing. And
how sometimes you're coasting because everything else is just so much more difficult. Like, I would rather just numb myself. With whatever, of tuning out, of turning to food, of turning to whatever that might look like, so that you are just like
not having to deal with it.
Yeah.
So the very first thing is everything feels like it's a routine. Like, not a routine as in you have a nice routine. You get up in the morning, you go to the gym.
I like routine.
And I love routine. I mean routine in the fact that there's no effort, that everything just seems the same. No matter what, on Monday night, we're going to eat this. On Tuesday night, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Saturday night at 6:00 is when we have sex. And Sunday is when we do this. And like, you've made everything so routine and regimented that there's no spontaneous, there's nothing.
Even conversations can be routine. Like, are we really actively, you know, when we're out on a date and we're supposed to be pouring into each other, are we actively talking about each other and our relationship? Or is it just the same things that we discuss day in and day out? And not to say that discussing your children is a bad thing, but if you're wanting to, that can't be the only thing. Like, and we really felt that tension, I guess, when the kids were little, because it's kind of like, what else do we talk about? Right. I remember us going on lots of dates, and just it all of a sudden just being this whole big conversation about the kids and how cute they were and what they were doing and whatever, but not really engaging each other and like, hey, how are you doing? Yeah.
How are you feeling? Where's your soul at right now? Like, what are the things
what
that
is something
going on?
Like, are you happy with, or are you feeling stressed about an area that I'm not pitching in? Or do you know what I mean? Like, using that as talking through issues. It just kind of went to the kids or whatever other the topic.
And it's that mindset of what we talked about before is, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
That is so. I'm sure we've said this to each other.
Why would I try something new? This is working. And if the problem with that particular mindset where the routine sets in is that it's really quite insidious is such a strong word. It just happens. Right. And all of a sudden you're in a routine and everything's the same. You're not trying anymore. You know, at 7:30, you're going to sit down, you're going to watch Netflix.
Right.
Then at 9:30, you're going to go to bed.
Yeah.
You talk to each other, you grab your cell phones.
It's like two people living in the same house, but living separate lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Which we've coached couples through that. That's a hard thing to come through. But that's because they just stopped engaging with each other. There was a disconnect. They stopped engaging. It wasn't that they were fighting, or they even had unhealthy patterns or communication patterns, but they let the routine sit in.
Well, where's the spontaneity? Right. Yeah. I know I'm not the most spontaneous person, but, you know, just to use as an example.
As long as you go along with my weirdness, you're fine.
Right. But I don't always want to do that. And there's a restaurant here in Canada that is called Red Robin. I don't know if it's in the States or anywhere else, but they have this amazing chicken sandwich, in my opinion. That is
It's
the
not that good.
California chicken burger, and there's like bacon and avocado and everything delicious in this, and it's consistently good. I don't think I've had it wrapped in lettuce instead of bread, and it was equally as satisfying. And so when we go there, it's fairly obvious what I'm going to have.
Oh, I can tell you.
I don't like to shake things up.
I can tell you what you're going to have at almost every restaurant before you get there. And then when you order something different, I'm like, what just happened?
And I'm like, ooh, this is me living out the box, right? I'm living outside of the box. But I really struggle with that whole thing of like shaking things up. And I think with a routine, it's okay to shake things up. Try a new restaurant, right? Try a new coffee shop if that's your thing. When it comes to intimacy, trying a new position, right? Yeah. Like of just trying to like, I know we went there, right? But of just trying to get out of that routine of like, because routines after a while, I mean, come on, they get boring.
Yeah. And in relationships, in marriage, we can tell you, it doesn't need to be boring.
It shouldn't be boring.
It should be like, there should be routine. We're not saying just go spontaneously.
Right. And
throw everything
caution
away
to the wind.
and just do whatever you want. We're saying in how you interact with each other and how you grow your marriage, routine is dangerous, and it can be very dangerous. And so the first one is routine. The next one is you don't talk a lot about the future.
Right. I think this is the one where we kind of camped out with each other.
Well, I also want to start with, there's times where in a relationship, you're both just focused on other things. You're moving in a direction together, but you're also working things out.
Right.
And so sometimes you're not talking about the future. I'm talking about when everything is so routine, you can't see past what's going to happen by the end of the week, and you're not talking about your futures for a house. You're not talking about what's going to happen with your kids. Where do we want to go for holidays in 2 years? What do you want to plan for a schedule? Dream big and dream often, and it'll bring you close together. There's been times in our relationship that we have not dreamed at all or even talked about the future because we were so drained with always pushing for the future that sometimes we just like, God, where's our answered prayers? We're tired of laying these things out before you and not having things answered. And it's something inside of us that we just keep working through.
Yeah. And that's not to say that we're discontent with the present, because I think that there's opportunities that can be missed if you're so focused on futuristic things and not living life in the present. Yeah. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, this complacency of, well, it's never going to happen anyway, so why bother?
Yep.
That mindset of like, we struggle with this.
Yeah.
We struggle with like, we've got vision and futuristic things for everybody else, but when it comes to us, it's a real challenge.
Yeah, sometimes it's sit down and discuss what we want to do with the future. We live in a town where the prices for housing is some of the worst in all of Canada. They're in the top 4 most expensive places to live, and so if I look to the future, and with just terms of how are we going to be able to afford these things, it doesn't seem feasible or possible.
No.
And so it's easy just to shut down when you think you can't move forward because you're like, man, I'm never going to be able to reach the goal.
Right.
As the housing prices go higher and higher, it's crazy, right? So it's discouraging. And so
I think it's just a matter of not just going through the motions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think coasting is just going through the motions, but you're not really actively putting in any sort of effort to converse about, hey, what could we do?
Yeah.
And even here, as we're having a podcast, where do we see this going?
Yeah.
And really taking that time to talk with each other about what could this turn into? What could this be?
Right.
Right.
And so the first one was everything feels routine. The next one is you don't talk a lot about the future. And the next one is
there's no conflict or seeming like
you never
disagreements.
Fight. You never fight anymore.
Right.
And it sounds so funny when you say it like that, because there's this real mentality out there that I completely disagree with, that says it's a really good thing if you're not fighting. And we're not talking about fighting like an all-out knockdown,
an abusive relationship.
No. I'm not even talking about abuse. I'm just talking about you're not having a very good, strongly heated debate discussion about anything. You don't even care enough. This always seems to me like you don't even care enough about the other person to disagree with an opinion that you have that's opposing to theirs.
Right. And I agree with that because, when we had talked about communication styles and whatever, and how Brian has said time and time again that he's kind of a big personality and he can kind of bulldoze a conversation, but I have a choice. I can either match him and be like, well, you know what? I disagree with you and here's why, or I feel like that's not the case, and just have a disagreement because let's face it, we don't 100% agree with each other all of the time.
And I've never known one healthy relationship,
right?
Ever healthy. I mean, healthy relationship where two people agreed on 100% of everything they ever touched, did, talked about, looked at, house they went to, kids' decisions they had to make, hospital, whatever it happens to be. There's not one thing. Like, men and women think fundamentally different.
Absolutely.
And just right there, just on that basis alone, Natalie and I are going to disagree on different things. She may come at it from an emotional standpoint. I'm going to come at it from a relational standpoint. Well, now we're at
not a standstill, but like
we're seeing the same thing differently. And so that's when you learn to work together.
That's right. And if you find yourself that you're like, no, like we actually really do, we're really agreeable in this and that. One of you, if we're going to be honest, may be pushed over.
Mm-hmm.
And one of you may be a passive communicator, which is not healthy.
Nope.
And where it's like, well, I'm going to pick my battles. And this is probably one that will just go along with the flow. This isn't about choosing sides. This isn't about picking battles. This is about being able to have a conversation about where your standpoint is versus someone else's standpoint. It doesn't have to be heated. It could be, about the kids or about finances or whatever it is, but being able to talk about that
and have the argument or the disagreement,
right,
or the fight, whatever you want to call it, whatever you call it in your house, but being able to have that and then clearly articulate to each other what that is.
Right, because sharing those things, sharing those thoughts, those opinions, and working through them shows the other person that you care.
Yeah, because when you're not disagreeing with them on something, or you feel like maybe it's not worth disagreeing with, that their opinion isn't worth anything, or it's too much and I don't want to have to deal with it.
Right. And remember how we had said several podcasts ago, that's not about being right. It's about coming to that place, or it's not about coming to an agreement, but it's coming to that place of understanding.
Right.
And sometimes your perspective is that shift.
Better than yours?
Yeah, quite frankly. And sometimes
I didn't expect her to say yes to that.
And sometimes my perspective is better than yours. And not better as in like, haha, like check for me. But sometimes it opens up your mind to, hey, I didn't realize that you had a fear about this, or I didn't realize, do you know what I mean? Like it just opens that, we grow a little deeper together.
Yeah.
I think is the bottom line I'm getting at.
And so we've gone through, everything feels routine. Maybe you're not talking a lot about the future. You're not even fighting anymore about anything, or disagreeing, or having debates on stuff.
I hate that word, fighting.
We fighting, but it is. We fight. Sometimes we fight. And the next one is you stop trying to surprise or
date
impress
your partner
or delight them in any way, shape, or form. So, and it's funny. Do you remember at the like when we were first early dating? You're constantly trying to. I was trying to impress you.
Put your best foot forward.
Yeah, with how I look and
how we talk
and my hair, and I got these plans for the future.
We flirted well.
Yeah, and do all those things, and then what happens when you get married? It just changes.
Well, it does, because
maybe not in the first 6 months.
Well, for ours,
years.
it was like the day after. So let's maybe for you, it hasn't happened yet. But for us was instant.
Yeah. Right. And so things begin to change, and it's not bad
necessarily.
No, it's not necessarily bad that they've changed, but we realize now that like I can read Natalie on the phone. I may not even see her face. I can read her on the phone, or she's having a bit of a down day, and I'm at work, and I talk to her at like 3:00, and I come home at 5, and I swing by and I get her a Tim Hortons. Because her love language is Tim Hortons at 5:00 at night some days.
Yep.
And so to us, that is, okay, that impresses her. She's like, oh, he thought of me. Right. Like he cared enough about in this moment to think of me and not just himself. Right.
Which, and this, I think, it doesn't have to be expensive.
Right.
And I think when we were dating, sort of like there was this almost unspoken rule that in order to like qualify for a date, it had to be at this kind of a restaurant where we had to dress up like this.
Yeah.
And we want to free you. I mean, if that's your idea of dating your partner and it's going to fine dining restaurants, all the power to you.
Yeah.
It's not our thing. It never's been our thing. I mean, last night we went out for a lovely dinner, a very expensive dinner at a winery. which we never usually do, and instantly felt guilty about that. And, you know, it took you saying, this is not the end of the world. Like, it's okay.
And it was for a special occasion for my sister. And it was really exciting. But it is one of those things, you got to figure out what's going to be the best for you. And how do you, like, how I impressed Natalie when we were dating versus
it is different
versus when we had kids
Yeah.
is completely different. She thinks I'm a superstar when I come home with milk sometimes, because like when you have 3 small children, you need milk. Or when
we've got teenagers, and so when you've got,
we sometimes don't even have food in the house because they eat so much. She's like, hey, can you stop by and just get some groceries on the way home? Things change. But when you stop even caring about that, all of these things that we've talked about where it's routine, you're not fighting anymore, all of those things that we're talking about all equal, like you stop trying in the relationship. You're just coasting along and hoping things that are going to work out, and that you don't run your relationship into the side of the mountain.
Exactly.
Right. And then when the moment you, like, to have a healthy, strong, good relationship, it takes a lot of work.
It does. And making sure that these kind of simple gestures don't fall by the wayside, because they're important. Like, you know, our kids get cringed out when they see us kissing in the kitchen, but it's like, these are the things that, you know, you have to have a healthy sex life. We show affection in front of our children.
Right.
And so these are what keeps us loving each other.
Absolutely.
Right? We're going on dates. Oh, you're always gone, our daughter says. And it's like, no, we're not always gone, but we're making each other a priority. And that's what's keeping us married. So, right? Like, don't underestimate the power of making those small steps forward for your spouse. It goes a long way.
And if you can recognize these things in your relationship, we're not saying that this is one of those things. If you have this type of relationship, you're never, ever, ever going to be able to come out of it. This is just, you got to reactivate that love. You got to reactivate that direction, passion for moving forward. Like, if your sex life is boring, try something else. If your dating life is boring,
shall we clarify? Try something else?
No.
All right. Right. Obviously with your partner.
Yeah. But right. Like,
let's clarify that. Not try something else with someone else. But try.
We're talking about in the context of your current marriage, the person that you are trying to no longer be coasting with.
That's right.
Because you want to just shake things up and try something new. You don't want to just be coasting along, because ultimately that can be more dangerous than being being in a crisis management.
Yeah.
Crisis. We've seen people. We've coached couples that have been in crisis sometimes for years and years and years. And are still in crisis because they're unwilling to actually help themselves out of the crisis.
I think we say this all the time of self-reflection.
Oh, reflect.
You have to be aware and take an honest look at yourself and your relationship together and be like, hey, here's some warning signs. And
you have to be responsible for your own behavior.
That's right. Right. But I think addressing that and realizing, hey, Are we thriving in our marriage? Are we just surviving? Are we just going through the motions to check it off our list of things to do?
Absolutely.
Or, you know, the marriage qualifications or whatever. Yeah, like, yep. Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
You might not be good. Mm-hmm. Or your partner might not feel like you're in a good spot.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
True.
And rediscovering the things that make you a good team. Like I had to rediscover like what I fell in love with. The characteristics about you years ago that I loved about you.
I didn't make that easy.
No, right? And
but
your
we found
partner, we did. Your partner might not make it easy either, but
and she still likes
find creative ways to reignite that, like, and rediscover why you two are a great team.
Absolutely. And so this is, again, if you've really been enjoying these podcasts, we so much appreciate when you share, when you like it, when you send us an email, wherever you happen to be listening to it. It means a lot when you tell people about Amplified Marriage. You can follow us on Instagram and you can follow us on Facebook. And if you do, we say this all the time, if you have a question or a topic or anything you want us to discuss, if you even just want us to respond to a message that you have, just reach out to us on those platforms. But you can also email us at amplifiedmarriage@gmail.com. And as you hear us say every single one of these, we believe that your marriage can be reset,
refreshed,
recharged,
and restored.
Thanks so much for listening.
Talk to you soon.